Oh. Mm. Oh. Hi. Good morning. Yeah, I was kind of scrambling. Yes. Oh, wait. Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Question. Do you want to do a side by side live?
I'm happy to follow your lead, but yeah, that'd be great.
So basically, get out of this and then go live on your own, like
Yeah,
separately. You can say like live with CMR or something, and then I will invite you or add you, and we'll
sounds
be
good.
side by side. Okay.
Okay, I'll be
All
right
right.
back.
All right. My earbud's not working. Come on. Interesting. Where's my other earbud? Of course, my earbuds aren't working. Hi.
Okay, nice. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, and thank you for doing this again. I'm sorry that I missed our last opportunity.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
How are you?
I'm probably a little less busy than you are. I'm
Uh,
good.
good.
I'm good.
Awesome.
I
Hey,
just
what's up,
finished
everybody?
I've rushed to work out and shower and be like, okay, here
Yeah,
I am.
it sounds like you're ready for the campaign trail life, one way or the other, you know?
Oh God.
Yeah.
I'm human chaos, I assure you. Yeah, but I've always been like that, so it's fine. My poor husband,
Yeah.
he's used to it.
Cool. So how should we get started? Like, I'd love to,
Yeah,
talk a
tell a
little
little
bit
bit
about.
about
Okay.
you and your campaign, and yeah, definitely.
Yeah, awesome. Well, nice to meet everybody. Happy that everybody's on the chat right now. My name is Neal Walia. I am a grassroots Democrat. I'm running for Congress in Colorado's first congressional district, which is right here in Denver, Colorado. And so I think the best way to talk about myself is to share a story with you all. First, about my parents who are from India. And so I'm the son of Indian immigrants. I'm the first person in my family to be born in the United States of America. And when I was about 13 years old, my parents took my sister and I on a trip to go visit family in Old Delhi. And for those of you who are familiar with India and Delhi in general, um, when you're outside, and one afternoon, this is a story about my parents taking us out into a bazaar. A bazaar looks like dirt roads. It looks like stores on your left, stores on your right. Tens and thousands of people as far as your eyes can see. And yet, one afternoon, my parents took us out onto the bazaar, and I remember we kind of stumbled upon this young boy. And this boy had to have been the same age as I was, same color skin, same eyes, same haircut. And yet, here this young man was absolutely begging for his life without a single piece of clothing on his body. And, I remember asking myself in that moment, how is it possible that this young kid who comes from the same heritage, the same country of origin as I do, has absolutely nothing? And yet I get to go home every single night to a roof over my head, to clothes on my back, and to warm food in my belly. Now, I've never really stopped thinking about this young man. And the real tragedy about this story is that his story is now happening right here in Denver, Colorado, where I live. And that story is what my parents escaped from in order to come to this country in pursuit of what was known as the American dream. And like my parents, I've taken all the steps that I've been told that would allow me to build a better life for me and my loved ones, right? I went to undergrad here in Colorado. I went to graduate school here in the University of Colorado at Denver. I have two master's degrees. I taught students for a few years. I worked for the former governor of Colorado with our
Oh,
unhoused
nice.
neighbors. And then that took me out to DC, where I spent about 5 years of my career in and out of the halls of Congress, working in our nation's capital. And yet, in spite of taking all of these steps, like many Americans, I feel like my life is more vulnerable than it's ever felt. And what I mean by that is I'm being crushed by a lifetime of student debt. I can't afford to buy a home in the city that I want to live in.
Oh
The
gosh.
cost of childcare is something that is actively delaying my wife and I's ability to kind of start that chapter as a family. And now my parents, my dad is 70, my mom is in her mid 60s. They're both public school teachers here in Colorado. They've actively delayed their retirement, not only because of their own economic insecurity, but because they're asking themselves a very important question that I think a lot of people in their generation are asking themselves, which is, do I have a role left to play in shaping the future of my children and my grandchildren? And really, it was feeling all of these pressures in my own life and knowing that there are millions and millions of Americans going through the same thing that I'm going through. That's why I'm running. I think our communities
Yeah.
deserve to have someone who is living their struggles, but more importantly, will fight to fix them as if their lives depended on it, because my life does. And so
Yeah.
that's like the big why I decided to take this step. And a little bit about my district. So I am challenging a 25-year sitting incumbent. She is a Democrat, very much someone who I would describe as like a corporate centrist.
Okay.
And one of the biggest challenges I've always had with national politics, and this isn't exactly a Republican thing specifically, it's also a Democrat thing, which is
Hmm.
both parties have become saturated with corporate PAC money, right? And I think that's really challenged our district from being the voice in the progressive movement that I think so many people are looking for. Because Denver, my district, is a D plus 57 district. We have one of the most progressive leaning districts
Yeah.
on this side of the country. And there are people who are really looking for us to take our step into being a champion for the Green New Deal, which is something that my opponent does not believe in. She hasn't signed a single piece of Green New Deal legislation.
Mm.
I believe firmly in healthcare as a human right. I strongly support Medicare for all. I think my opponent might agree on paper that that's the best idea, but when your number one financial contributor are big pharmaceutical companies and healthcare lobbyists, you can't exactly
Your vote
champion
says otherwise.
issue. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the final piece of this equation is, our nation's housing crisis. For those of you who have been to Denver, these days it is very common to go outside and to see camps and unhoused neighbors on every single block. Our homeless crisis, doubled uh, in the year after COVID, and then since then as well.
Yeah.
And we now are in a place where we need major federal investments, not only into permanent supportive housing, but affordable housing for people like myself and other Americans who want to be homeowners, who want to step into starting a family, but are in a position, like a lot of people, where they feel very financially insecure and don't feel confident in taking that step. And so, unfortunately, this was the first time in 25 years that my opponent has really engaged on the topic of the housing crisis, right? She waited for it to become a full blown crisis uh, that is now very, very far from being able to be managed
Hmm.
without some deep-rooted structural reform. And so, anyway, these are the things that we're trying to change. And when I win our primary in June, we just qualified for the ballot about a month ago, so it's one
Yay.
on one. Yeah, one on one. No Republican challenger, right? So our
Okay.
primary is our election. When we win, I'll be the first person of color to ever represent this district, which is
That's awesome.
astonishing to me because, Denver, Colorado is one of the most diverse cities
Yeah.
in Colorado, right? But more important to me is also knowing that I'll be the only candidate at the federal level who has never accepted corporate PAC money. And so
Right.
I've been talking a little bit, but that's like a little bit about me. That's a
No,
little
that's
bit
awesome.
about the campaign and kind of what we're trying to do out here in the Mile High City.
Unfortunately, the only downside to this type of setup is you can't see my comments and I can't see your comments.
Okay, cool.
But someone's asking, what about the climate crisis, which you mentioned at the beginning? You were addressing the Green New Deal and how
Yeah,
she's done little to nothing in respect to,
right.
any legislation with that. So he's
Yeah,
definitely on board with that.
and like, speaking to the climate crisis, I mean, like, Colorado is ground zero for understanding what that means. On one, like, for one side of this equation is that, we had the biggest fire in our state's history in the winter of last year. It was called the
Hmm.
Marshall Fire, right? Hundreds
Yeah.
and hundreds of homes and small businesses all over Boulder County burned to the ground, right? And we're now not in a place where we have a fire season anymore, right? This is now a
Right.
year-long affair. If there is sun and
Yeah.
there is wind, fires are happening every single day in Colorado. But in addition to that, our city, Denver, there are two communities that live in Denver. They're called Globeville and Elyria, Swansea. They registered two of the most polluted zip codes in the United States of America last year
Oh, wow.
because they live in close proximity to like oil and gas plants, but also because there's a lot of highway construction that is happening here that is
Yeah.
causing a lot of unwanted particles and chemicals to go into the air. And, you know, these communities, which are heavily brown and black communities and working class, are the ones who suffer from this every single
Yeah.
day. And so there's also a huge environmental justice and racism component to kind of my stance and why we support the Green New Deal, because, you know, it's not just a step forward to rescue the planet from environmental destruction, but it's also, you know, the hope of building a new economy from the bottom
Yeah.
up that champions working class and middle class Americans all over America. So the climate crisis is definitely one of the major pillars of what we're running on, and I appreciate that question.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned childcare. Obviously, I have three children. Now they're all in public education, thankfully. I don't
Yeah.
have little ones anymore. God, thank you. Yeah, my oldest daughter got 1.5 years of preschool, simply because my mom helped and we were able to afford it. Otherwise, my other daughters had no access to preschool.
Right.
Now, I will say my middle daughter did like 6 months at a local church one that was reasonably priced.
Sure.
I hate to be that person because I did raise them in a very Christian conservative lifestyle up until, the last several years. But, it was a limited education. She went into kindergarten, you know, not knowing even a quarter of what her older sister had known. So we're seeing this, and I'm so frustrated that people don't understand how beneficial funding childcare for families would be for the economy. Not only the fact that we would be able to keep these facilities open and they could be prosperous and, hiring people and,
Yeah.
raising wages, but also the amount of people that would go into the workforce if they had the ability to put their children in childcare.
Yeah.
That was
Definitely.
one of my things. I sacrificed working for my oldest for 2.5 years, and she was literally able to memorize books at age 2 because
Wow.
I sat at home reading to her constant. Like I had nannied two children just to make some ends meet and make some extra money. So she did have some social interactions as an infant and toddler. And then, financially, I had to go back to work, and I ended up luckily having a mother-in-law at the time that didn't work or worked kind of her own hours, but she didn't give her the education. So the last year before she entered kindergarten, we were able to afford a preschool again, for a year. But people just don't understand the foundation that a lot of preschools give these children. Education wise, they're going in with so much more benefits than going in blind. Basically, I mean, it's amazing to me see kindergartens in my school where there's kids that can already recite the alphabet, recognize
Yeah.
letters, even put words together.
Wow.
And then there's children that don't even know what the color purple is. So we're seeing these huge, gaps in education level straight from the gate, where we could be eliminating that with these types of programs. And it's something that it would take the most minuscule reallocation of funding. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad that's something you mentioned. And like you said, you guys are someone that's dealing with that. And there's just countless families. It's funny to me because the GOP, the conservative side of the argument, is like, you know, we want to see families and we want to see people having children, and, people aren't having children at the same rate. Well, we can't afford to. We're in a
Yeah.
society where we like, I mean, if I was my age, if I was 20 years ago now, I wouldn't have the kids I had. Like, I really wouldn't.
Definitely. Yeah.
It wouldn't make financial sense. I struggled with the kids I had regardless, but like, it just doesn't make financial sense for a lot of people. And they
Yeah.
need to acknowledge that these kids, you know, they need more. These families, they need more.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
instead, they're advocating for these parental rights bills that, ironically, for some families are going to do more damage than harm, as we all know. But yeah, it's just, yeah, I definitely think that childcare needs to be at the forefront too. So I'm glad that's something you're talking about.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think you've highlighted some like really important points when you're talking about childcare, right? Like The first is that obviously, in terms of education outcomes, universal childcare and more access to education, especially from a young age, is going to profoundly impact the learning ability and the growth and development of our children, right? That
Hmm.
goes without saying. I think we would both agree with that. But what you've just
Yeah.
highlighted is the intersectionality of childcare in terms of all aspects of life, right? I think your point was so important that, the cost of living for our generation, um, and it's not just with childcare, right? Housing,
Everything.
um, yeah, housing, healthcare, even just transit, like all of these aspects of life are more expensive for us than they've ever been in the history of our society, right? And I
Hmm.
have friends who are new parents who tell me that they're paying $3,000 a month per kid, um, just to provide a decent life for their children. And I think that it's so important for us to recognize that, to your point, right, with healthcare access, with education access, with all of these things that are social public needs, if they become universally accessible to all Americans, right, this is how you transform a country from the bottom up and provide much needed relief to working class and middle class families all over this country who are feeling
Yeah.
the full weight of the American economy, right? I mean, like, it feels very heavy just living
Yes.
these days,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah.
but I also like your point about financing, right? Because I think that, it's time that we really treated certain things as a national priority that we haven't taken a step to do as a country, right? Like, I think I would agree with your point that if we can pay for multi-trillion-dollar wars overseas, if we can give multi-billion tax breaks to the richest amongst us, if we can, finance all these other things that have never really transformed our country but have made, the richest people and the
Richer.
corporations richer. Yeah, like, why can't we invest into community, right? Why
Yeah.
can't we invest into our people? And I think, I'm happy to hear you, but also so many other people kind of start to really echo these points. And I do
Yeah.
think that change is coming. I think it's coming slowly, but I do think as our generation, as people like you and me, hopefully occupy these seats of office at some day, and we get, a lot of very, uh, like a lot of more old school, a lot more traditional, a lot more centrist, party oriented types of people out of office. I'm hoping that we are the ones who are able to kind of take this step forward as a country because, our lives are hard right now, and we
Yeah.
need change. So, uh, I'd love to ask you a question though.
Yes.
I think I'd love to hear a little bit about your background. I also know that you were very much contemplating a run, right? Like, would love to hear a little bit more about that. Kind of what was that like for you, but also like, what ultimately led to your decision to say maybe this isn't the right moment in time
Right.
for me to take this step.
Um, so a little bit about me, obviously, I kind of so I am married. I am second married. So this is my second marriage. I was divorced before. Had three daughters from my first marriage. My oldest is graduating high school this year. And
Congratulations.
thanks. And
Yeah.
basically, I didn't really grow up any type of political affiliation. My parents didn't talk politics. I never knew who they voted for. It was very hush hush, which I think a lot of families experience, those things you don't talk about: finances, politics, religion.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up in an ultra religious like family. Like, we believed in God. We had a Bible in the house. We prayed when shit got sideways. That was kind of what my mom's mindset was. Um, but I married into a very hyper Christian conservative family. Got really sucked in. Was one of these, like, in church 3 times a week, taught Sunday school, sang in the choir. Had my children in all of the programs, Awanas, etc. And so I that became like a part of basically who I was, and it influenced the way I viewed things, the way I voted. When I did vote, I really wasn't very active politically, in my earlier adult days, and really a combination of things. My daughter, who came out as pansexual when she was 15, but she had been experiencing as early as 11 and just didn't feel comfortable because I had been putting her in the seat of a church that told her she was evil for
Yeah.
feeling that way. So that was a big transformation. She also kind of started becoming um, not necessarily less religious. She was still going to, like, youth groups and things like that, but she definitely started to be a little more, I'm trying to think of the word, realistic in what she saw in society. she was exposed, luckily, to very diverse public education. All the schools that we have in our community, I'm really grateful, are incredibly diverse. And she's had friends from every side of everywhere. She's done cross country and indoor track the last 4 years. So she's just been a part of a community, basically. And that with, just taking some AP courses and learning more about history and turning me on to a lot of political YouTubers, actually, that I'd never heard about, really opened my eyes to the systemic problems that we have. And I think the biggest hurdle for me, or the biggest challenge to my mindset, was working in public education. When I took on a job, and it was just a part-time job to, have a good summer schedule with my kids and like be more available as a mom, like that was the mindset behind it. But it transformed my bubble, because
Wow.
for the first time I was really seeing how some people were living, or trying to live. I was seeing how some kids didn't have truly family. I mean, it was just very eye-opening to see the diversity of these very, privileged and well-off children versus literally people living 4 families in a motel
Yeah.
room or in their car.
Right.
So yeah, that really kind of was the foundation of why I transformed my ideals and my political views, and why I became very hyper political and more outspoken about everything. Because I just saw it. I was very involved in my community during the George Floyd, going to local BLM rallies and protests, and it was just a really positive community. I mean, we didn't have violence. I get frustrated when I hear people pivot to this, riots. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't see that. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, and as we know, 94% of all of that happened during those summers was incredibly peaceful. And,
Sure. Yeah.
but again, like that was the part of the community I was involved
Yeah.
in. And so I obviously had gotten on TikTok. I didn't get political until after January 6th. I had political views. I followed political creators on here. So I was
Mm.
engaging with them. But I wasn't comfortable enough to be outspoken, because I
Sure.
had built a following of roughly 20,000 people, being a quirky mom that ran, like that was my stitch.
Sure.
And then after January 6th, it kind of flipped. And I was like, I can't stay quiet
Yeah.
anymore. And so from that point on, I got really deep dived into conspiracy talk. I was kind of living on Telegram and Parler and living in the other side, researching everything that they were putting out as factual. It was kind of
Wow.
dark. I did that for probably about 6 months.
Oh my
So a lot of
God.
my original content was, I mean, I made it humorous, but honestly, it was very dark and pretty jarring for my mental health, because
I was
I
gonna
was
say
just
it sounds like
exposed
you
some
subjected
really bad
yourself to
shit.
trauma. Yeah, that's
Yeah. And
insane.
I mean,
Yeah.
to the point that, I mean, there was people I had to report to, like Secret Service, for making threats against the president. Like it was,
Wow.
I literally had Secret Service call me one day at like 8 o'clock at night. So it was a pretty big jump in my daily life to kind of switch to this new reality. Um, so obviously, the more I got involved, the more I thought that the best thing to do is get into politics, be someone who is not, like you said, corporately bought, grassroots, like,
Good for you.
um,
Yeah, I
you
love
know.
that. That's what I'm talking
So
about.
my downfall play, I think, was I went from nothing to like Congress, one, um,
Sure. Sure.
and it was kind of like a funny coincidence. Like I had filled out some paperwork on the federal website, and all of a sudden I get this random call from my local, election office, like, "Hey, you need to do X, Y, Z to remain on the ballot." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So I didn't even realize that like the stuff that I had done had actually put
Yeah.
me on the ballot.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, maybe this is like the fates that be telling me, let's do this. And when I'd first talked about it, my husband and other people weren't kind of like on board. So I had a lot of hesitation. And that's kind of why I was like, let me just hold off. And
Totally.
then when I got that call and I kind of told him and other people, he's like, let's do this. Like, let's see what happens. So I literally raised $50,000 in just over 4 days. I had
Wow.
collected just over 300 of my 1,000 signatures in about a week, with help
That's
around the
amazing.
district.
Wow.
And I was, really, I mean, nervous as hell, but amped up. Like, I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
God, this might actually happen. I had reached out to Qasim Rashid, who is one of the people that ran against Whitman last time. So he was kind of mentoring me a little bit. And then I think I was maybe 6 days into officially announcing it, like making it public. I got a message from someone that basically was a screenshot of a text. I knew the person that sent it. And they alluded to knowing all of my names, like my birth name, my maiden name, which is my children's names, making some comments about never, making sure she never sets foot in the doors of Congress, da 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 da. Which initially I was like, I kind of blew it off. Like it upset me a little bit because obviously my children's names is not mine. And so having that kind of
Of course.
circulating makes you nervous. You've got children, you want to
Yeah,
protect them.
definitely.
And then I spoke to Kazem and learned some kind of things that he dealt with, which was countless death threats. Someone some that seemed even a little more worrisome that they had to have investigated. He actually had a large campaign poster of his face near his campaign office that was shot 25 times with,
Wow.
someone came up and shot up. And then in the meantime, Whitman is making, accusations about him being a terrorist, a Muslim terrorist, Now, given I obviously don't have that concern for me as, I'm a presenting white woman, but it's the fact that I know that he's what he's capable of. And then kind of the final straw was a local woman actually went on Facebook, accused me of pretending to be someone else on Facebook, accused me of being a Kabbalist, made kind of some sideways death threats, and then had a countless number of people under this kind of like cheering her rhetoric on. And I'm like, here I am, like up until 4 years ago, a single mom of 3 kids who literally makes like 12 grand a year and I don't have security. I don't live in a gated community. I don't have access to make sure that when my kids walk home from school every day, they're not going to be greeted by some psychopath
Yeah,
on my front
definitely.
doorstep. So I kind of, it was really hard. I literally sat on my couch for about 12 hours straight, refunding every single person individually on Act Blue because you have to do each one. And I don't know, at that point, like 3,000 of them that had contributed. So I did all that and just crying. It was just a mess. But I've made the decision that next year we have some local offices coming available, both in the State House and the Board of Supervisors. We have a school board opening, but I don't think I can run for it because it's not in my
Sure.
direct district, which I'd really love to do. But so that is my plan as going forward, is to look into some of these local offices. And my big thing right now is public education. I just see what teachers are going through, the way that a lot of Republican governors are trying to defund public education, and in essence,
Yeah,
de- remove the ability for people that need it the most to have
right.
access to good education. So those are like really important to me, as well as women's rights, and those are things that I know I'd have a little more power with at a state level.
Totally.
So yeah, so I'm gonna kind of run on those.
Good for you.
Hopefully next year, I
Yeah.
can look into picking a position in January and go from there. So
That's wonderful. And I think like you have a great story. You have all the right reasons to run, and like that's what matters most. And I can definitely empathize with the challenges of running for a position like Congress, in the sense that like I'm a young brown man, first time candidate, never run for office before. And when we stepped into this, I will tell you, like, a lot of people were kind of telling me, like, you're insane, right? Like, you're doomed to fail. You're taking on, a 25-year corporate, like, establishment giant, someone they call, like,
yeah,
the Nancy Pelosi of Colorado. And, on
I mean,
top of
she needs
that,
to go too. So let's just be real, okay? This
yeah,
woman is
but, like,
a dinosaur,
but
but
still someone who is, like, quote unquote, progressive in certain
she
people's
is. She
eyes,
is.
right?
I just feel like we
Yeah.
need younger
Oh, I
progressives
believe,
in
believe
that
me,
position.
I
And they
we share
exist in
that.
Congress already. We
Yeah,
exist. I mean, she could be she could be recommending someone. I mean, I got some people
yeah.
in my head versus kind of holding on to that role. But that's, yeah,
No, but I mean, like, in general, like, whether it's I can't say that I've necessarily gotten a death threat thus far, but like, you do subject yourself to a lot of a lot of doubt, a lot of people who are trying to put you down and really like prevent you from taking steps, right? Because I
Yeah.
think what you've probably recognized is like, aside from like the very cultural challenges from just like what you're going to get from everyday people when you run into this, like
Right.
you're also challenging some very deep rooted financial and political interests, right? And whether
Yeah.
you're on the left or the right, whether you're a good person, whether you're, whatever your story is, like if you are disrupting the bank flow and the status quo, uh,
Yeah.
people are going to have a big problem with that, and they're going
Yeah.
to try to look for every reason to rip you off, like to tear you down, to put doubt into your head, and just kind of like subject yourself, I think, to really what's a permanent state of like mental health challenges, right? Because there are
Yeah.
so many ups and downs, right? Like you'll have a victory in this game, and then you'll feel like $1 million, right? And I'm sure you felt that after you got those
Oh yeah.
that influx of cash, right? Like those moments are so powerful, and you're like, I can't believe it. Like I'm doing this, and then the next moment, like someone will, they'll say something to you, or they might manipulate a situation, or they might like say something about you. Like there's so many things that can happen, and then all of a sudden,
It's a
you
roller
know, you
coaster.
you find yourself feeling depressed and anxious, right? And I think that's like
Yeah.
the thing that people don't typically talk about when they're on the campaign trail, like being in a campaign is like accepting that you're going to be subject to trauma like all the
Yeah.
time, and that is like the burden
Even
you have
after
to
you
carry.
win.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
be
no doubt.
prepared. I mean, it's like
I Yeah,
it's never ending, sadly. But if we can get some real people in
of
Congress,
course,
it's worth
of
it. It's
course.
worth it.
And it's worth it. You're right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like that is the ultimate point, right? Because I think like at the end of the day, I know that what we're trying to fight for, is so important, not just for us, but for so many people around us. And like that's what the movement is all about, right? Like it's a
Yeah.
desire to transform, it's a desire to put people above politics, party, and profit. And I think, the more we have people like you and me hopefully stepping up, whether that is local, state, or Congress, like I'm
Yeah.
happy to hear you're going for local positions, right? Because I think like for me, I always saw Congress as being where my best kind of impact could be. But I'll echo what you said, which is, you know, local education, local elections, state elections, they are under attack right now, right?
Oh yeah.
And what you just said about education is happening right here in Colorado as well. Like outside of Denver and Boulder and another city called Aurora, like Colorado is a deep red state, right? We
Yep.
have had a
And school
big
boards are
so
dismantling.
you know that story, right? Douglas County, just a few months ago, because their superintendent, by the way, this superintendent had taught for 25 years, conservative, like not MAGA
Yeah.
brand,
But
but
just a
like,
moderate like the
yeah,
norm conservatives that we
yeah,
love and miss. Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. He, at the beginning of the pandemic, said, you know what, we should probably wear masks, and
Canceled.
he
Canceled immediately.
yeah, he also said that I think we need to maintain and uphold like diversity curriculum in public schools. And those two things really were what kind of sealed his fate, because
Yeah.
what took place after that was a very like MAGA charter school private takeover of the school board that was responsible for choosing who the superintendent is. And once they hit
Yep.
the majority in a very uh, you know unethical way that eliminated all forms of due process,
Mhm.
um, they took his job. They fired him, right? And 25 years, right? Someone who so many staff, so many teachers, so many good people. They were protesting, and in a place like Highlands Ranch. And then for those of you who don't know, like Highlands Ranch is like a conservative suburb, right? Like the
Yeah.
idea of activism and protest in that community is not what it's going to look like in cities like Denver. But even then, thousands of people were on the streets protesting this decision, and like it didn't matter, right? They didn't care.
No,
Like they
minority
don't
rule.
care at all. Like
It's
it's not
insane to
about.
me.
Yeah. So I applaud you. I think that we should always be focusing not just on the highest elections, but local elections, state elections. Like these things need our attention and focus desperately right now, because
Yep.
the MAGA movement is real, and it's here to stay, and we have to fight that,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. And
Awesome.
I think it's tough for me too because I am someone that has I think it's a combination of being a former conservative, presenting the way I am, and being willing to have
Yeah.
conversations with people on the other side of the platforms. So I know, like, I mean, some people hate that about me. I mean, especially people that are incredibly alt-right. They don't like I'm a threat. Like, and I
Yeah.
think that was a concern because I am capable of having civilized conversation with a lot of people that I don't agree with.
Absolutely.
Um, but at the same time, you know, these extremists, you can't reach across the table. And I've tried. I've
Sure.
jumped into a handful of random conservative lives with people that I know are straight up QAnon, just to like,
Oh
I mean,
man.
I lived in
Yeah.
their world for 6 months, so I'm not naive to the way they think. I'm not ignorant to the, you know, conspiracies they believe. So I feel like if anything, I'm probably the best person for the job to try to have a conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, but it's hard. It's really hard because at this point, this juncture of reality, admitting any part of what they believe is wrong is, in essence, denying their own existence. And I hate
Yeah.
to say that, but it's where we are. Like, having to admit they were wrong has to admit that they wasted or lost years of their lives
Yeah. Yeah. I
investing
mean,
in these
that's tough. Yeah,
realities, and that's a hard thing to do.
it is.
And I know
I
a handful of people that have done it, but it is a hard thing to do.
yeah.
So
Well, what makes me happy to hear you say is like you're still making the effort to do that, because one thing I run into a lot on the campaign trail, and this is obviously with people who like make, politics and national politics like the bread and butter of the dialogue.
yeah,
It's like the topic of bipartisanship, right?
yeah.
Which I think that in Congress, my take is that that era of politics is dead, right? Like we don't have a bipartisan Congress. There is
Yeah.
no sense of collaboration. In fact, like it is effectively turned into, I think, Democrats trying to come up with the ideas and the policy solutions, and the GOP with the MAGA movement has turned into like the party of no, right? The party
Well,
of
vilifying it,
and
vilifying
all of
whatever
that,
movement they have, like
all of it.
changing the narrative to make
Yeah,
it seem like some invisible boogeyman, like
exactly.
CRT, and like the
All
most
of it.
recent one that I just dealt with in a video yesterday, insinuating that California is passing bills to kill babies 28 days old. Like,
Yeah,
it's
it's
mind
pretty wild.
blowing what reality of the situation they will ignore to create such an extreme alternate that
Yeah,
it does drive emotion. It does drive
totally.
people to continue to vote for the wrong people that
Yeah,
are not doing anything in their best interest. Like, I'm trying to concept how people are rooting. Like, I'm not knocking Elon Musk for making billions, okay? I'm not going to knock
sure, sure.
anybody for being successful. I would
Right,
never
right.
do that. But it almost flabbergasts me to watch people who literally are moaning about gas prices. You know, put this man on a pedestal. This man didn't pay any taxes in
Yeah,
2018, and yet he's worth $756 billion. You know,
yeah,
I just I don't understand. Like,
yeah,
I can get respecting someone for being a good businessman. You know, I can get that. I can get behind that. I
yeah.
can't get behind putting someone like that on a pedestal that has
Definitely.
access to money and has no desire to improve society.
I completely echo that, and I think also like if you're allowing, I
I don't
think,
hate Elon. I literally just said that. I have
yeah,
people in my comment section. She hates Elon, but not BLM for buying. First of all, a single person from BLM who stepped down bought a mansion. BLM as a movement, I'm not like, that's what I support. I don't support a corporation. I
yeah,
support a BLM movement. But
totally.
anyways,
Well, and I think what's challenging is like when you have these types of conversations, I think, whether it's on a platform like TikTok, social media, if you look to media and politics for kind of how you frame these dialogues, I think what you'll experience, what I've experienced always is that, these are venues for very hot takes to take place, right?
oh
Like
yeah,
there is an element, I think, of
shock
theater
value.
and all of that, right?
Yeah.
But the real work, though, has to happen like at the kitchen table, right? It has to happen in those one-to-one dialogues, which is why I was happy to hear you say, like, I still make the effort to talk to people who have different points of views than I do, and I do too. Like on the campaign trail, like I'm as lefty as they come, but like I'm still sitting down with like moderates and conservatives
And you have
because
to.
and you should, right?
Yeah.
No one should ever not take that step. No one should ever try to not have at least that kind of dialogue. Because like I think when you are in face with someone in front of them and you're talking and you're storytelling, like finding points of agreement to build upon are actually a lot easier than they are, in my opinion, online. Like I've sat down with
Yeah.
conservatives who will be like, yo, the environment's in trouble. And I'm like, yeah, I totally agree with that, right? Like that's amazing, you know? And like granted, I think we might have different ideas on how to
Perspectives. Yeah.
correct how to correct that, but like at
Yeah.
the end of the day, it's a point that you can start at. Same thing with like healthcare, right? I think there are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, if you're paying for healthcare right now, you're like, holy crap, like this is this is expensive. This is
Yeah.
bankrupting me, right? And I think that is something that everyone shares, right? And you can start there and you can build. Same thing with like the homeless crisis and the housing crisis. I think everyone alike does not want to see our neighbors become unhoused. I think
Right.
we share that. No one wants to live in an America or a country that has any people living on the streets. And I think that's really important. And so, you know, the more you can kind of have those types of dialogues, which I appreciate that you do, you know, I think that's really where the work has to begin. It's not going to take place in Congress necessarily. It's not going to take place
In your comment
online or
section.
anything. Yeah, and we got to get
It
back to
really
that. You
isn't.
know, it
Yeah.
it hurts me to like see us move into this. You know, like I do think that um, it is by design, and I think this is due to, you know, not just people like Elon, but like the Zuckerbergs, right? Like
Yeah.
I do think social media has really created a culture of us thinking that the real world we live in is gone, right? It's the worst.
Yeah.
It's toxic, it's failed. And then they want to incentivize you to find value. They want to incentivize you to find a meaning, not in your neighborhood, but on a
But
platform, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
let's remember, like, that's all in the name of profit, right? These people don't care about what you say. They don't care about if you're hurting. They don't care about whether you're doing well as an
You're
individual.
using their app.
Exactly, right? And I think like we've got to remember that. And I'm not trying to tell people not to get online. I think like being online,
No, it's
using your
yeah.
voice and doing all these things is a part of how we change things. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's where you commit all your eggs to, right? You've got to be versatile, you've got to be talking to people, and you've got to be engaging online, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not like a one
You
size
kind
fits
of
all
have
kind
to
of
have it
approach.
all.
Yeah.
I mean, and yeah, it's tough, and it's tough. Like
Yeah.
I joked, you know, even probably what, maybe 6 months ago when I hit 100K, and I'm like, why do
Yeah.
you people watch me? Like, I'm literally like, I have to tell people I'm really nobody. Like, I literally pick up dog shit in the yard. Like, I'm just like an average human
We all
being
are.
that takes their
Yeah.
kids to school every day. Like, and so it just it makes it's funny because it's true. You become almost in essence a celebrity. I'm
Yeah.
not, but I'm just saying
No,
you
but
have
you
this
kind
like
of are. Yeah, no, definitely. You are, right? Like that's reality. So anyway, sorry
yeah.
to cut you off.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's also no, you're fine. It's just it's bizarre. Like
Yeah.
when I went to the Women's March, um that was very bizarre because people were coming up to me
Yeah.
going, "Hey, Jess, hey, great," and I'm like, "I don't know you." Like, I
Yeah.
don't know you, and they're like, "We love you," and
That's awesome.
um,
That's great
it
though. I'm
is,
happy
but
to hear that.
it's
Yeah.
crazy, and like I recently joined a running group online for the Trevor Project, and I'm posting, you know, I'm just doing my normal post because I have a private account. So I'm just doing my post on there, like, hey, I've got this many miles, whatever. And people are like, wait a minute, do I know you? Like, that's
Yeah.
all my comments. I swear I know you. Are you on TikTok? I'm like, oh my God. So
That's
it's like
awesome.
you can't exist like like normal anymore. But at
Yeah.
the same time, a lot of people get on here for that intent. Like that's their goal. They want to be seen, they
Yeah.
want to be recognized. But some people aren't mentally prepared for what that entails, unfortunately. So that's a huge downside that I sadly see a lot of my mutuals on here going through on again, off again, that they're like being on social media and being present and having people expect things from you can be very traumatic, very, it can be very stressful. Like it's just, it introduces a level that I don't think a lot of people understand. You know,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
40. I've been through a lot of stuff. I've had a lot of trauma and tragedies in my life, you know, And
Yeah.
luckily I was raised by a mom that was like, you get knocked down, you get back up. And so
Yeah.
I've always kind of had that mindset. But, not everybody's that like that. And I mean, and I've had some days where some people on this app have kind of pushed me past the point, that I thought
Totally.
about leaving.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's social media definitely it's it's a double-edged sword.
But I'll tell you, what you're going through as an influencer is something that you will undoubtedly experience on the campaign trail as well, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah,
I think
yeah,
for me, um, like again, like I'm first time candidate, and I came here because I love like the movement for progressive policy. I love ideas. I love solutions, and like my background and my experiences and career have positioned me to understand like what are the ways we can, through policy, through ideas, and not just politics, right? Not the
yeah,
game, but what are real ways that we can change the outcomes for working class and middle class people all over this country. And like, when people are like, well, why are you running? What is the reason you want to go to Congress? Because I think sometimes what I have a real challenge with is when people are like, well, I want to be elected. Like, I want to be elected for the sake because I want to be a congressperson. And I'm like,
right,
that's not it. That's not it,
yeah,
right? I want to go to Congress because I think that my district is ready to turn ending homelessness into like the national bully pulpit issue that it should be. Like,
yeah,
I
yeah.
want to end homelessness when I get to Congress, right? That's
Versus
important.
Tennessee criminalizing it.
Right, exactly. But I think what you're going to balance when you ultimately run back for office is like learning that, like, it's not about that at all, actually. A campaign has very little to do with, okay, what are your ideas, right? Like, why do you want to run? What's your story? It's
Right,
actually very much it's a big marketing game, right? It's a big advertisement. And, like, you're essentially trying to find a way to raise money to pay for your voice to be amplified and kind of fit this mold that people in party politics and people who are in campaigns and all that want you to fit, right? And that
right,
requires you to do some of the drama, right? It requires you to kind of act, I guess, like a very confident, very outgoing, like you're ready to be a celebrity type of feeling. But like, I'll tell you, like, that's the hardest part for me, right? Like,
yeah.
I've never kind of
Being
had that
seen,
attention. I've never had that attention on me. You know what
yeah,
I mean? And then like all of a sudden, like, I'll tell you a funny story. Like a couple weeks ago when we made the ballot, right? Uh, you know, awesome feeling, right? Like feeling great, like one on one, we did it. All this thing that we kind of set out to do is happening. And I don't know that like local press picks it up, right? Like I'm not
right,
aware of the fact that like, it went on TV and stuff. And so that afternoon I'm out knocking doors, right? Because like that's like kind of been the big game plan for this campaign the entire time. Like for
yeah,
me, the power of a door knock transcends everything else. Like anything in digital, anything on TV, like I think people to people contact is what matters most. And so I'm in a
yep.
neighborhood. I knock on this door, and this like very kind elderly woman opens, and she's like, "Oh, I just saw you on TV," and I was like, "No, you didn't. Like, no, you didn't.
You're like, wait,
Like, no."
what?
She's like, "No, I'm serious," and I was like, "Are you sure? Like, it can't be me, right?" And she was like, no, like you're the guy that's taking on DeGette, right? And I was like, oh wow, oh okay, yeah, like that is me.
That's
And then
me.
she's like,
That's me.
Mom, come over here. And how even then like a grandma comes up and she like squints at me and she's like, yeah, you were just on the television. And I was like, this is not the same anymore. You know what I mean? Like
Surreal.
it's different. And now like that experience happens a little bit more. And like it is very overwhelming. And like what I love is like people are so genuine about it too. Like when people are enthused about liking you and like see
Yeah,
themselves in you, like I do think it is our responsibility to lean into that moment. And like it's not about how you feel necessarily at that time. It's to trying to like appreciate what that person is feeling and make
yeah,
them feel like they're valued and that like give them what they need. But like I would be lying if I said like it's weird, like it's like that feeling of like, yo, you don't gotta like, don't worry about that. Like that doesn't, I don't know. Like I'm still like learning what it means to kind of have that visibility. Like
yeah.
it's an ongoing challenge. So yeah,
But
cool.
it's fun. I will
Yeah,
say the brief amount of time that I got, to be a part of it, the campaign, I was standing out in front of a
yeah,
Walmart and in front of a Target asking for signatures and be like,
amazing.
hey, this is who
Yeah,
I am and this is what I'm doing. And they're like,
yeah,
cool, okay, so
yeah.
it was fun. It was fun.
Yeah, and I think
But
like people need like, you know, what I appreciate about your platform, and like I know like obviously there are times where you like get into the smoke and all that, and like, you know, things get a little bit
I
dicey, you
try to get
know.
less hairy lately, but yeah, you're not
Well, I
wrong.
mean,
You're not wrong.
it's positivity though, right? It's projecting, not even projecting, but it's like truly believing, I think, like hopefully that there are better days ahead of us, right? And knowing that like if we do, you know, choose to accept empathy, choose to accept like our humanity and all these other things that I think we very much put to the side,
Yeah,
you know, we can all change, right? We can all take that step. And so like when you're out here kind of like storytelling and I think like inspiring, you know, like I appreciate that because I think it's very easy to get lost in the ether. You know, I think it's
yeah,
actually more beneficial from like maybe a media standpoint to lean in to the drama and the hype and all that stuff. But like I think like what we're really lacking right now as a country is it's hope, right? And like
yeah,
I don't exactly, you know, like I know politically a lot of people probably have a lot of different opinions about President Obama and whatever, but like I do miss those days of feeling like we're a part of something, right?
yeah.
Like that
A
we're
calm. There was a calm
that
that I missed.
we're making change together, right?
Yeah,
Like that we have all these things and like, you know, the last 10 years have been so opposite of that, right? Like
yeah,
we've gone so negative, it's so toxic every single day and I'm like we've got to adjust, you know? Like
yeah.
we need to believe now, right? So, you
I
know,
agree.
yeah.
I think one of the arguments I've had is a lot of people are like, you just hate Trump. And I try to, it's hard for me. Like it's funny because like I said, I started listening to political YouTubers and more political driven content before I got political myself. But so it kind of opened my eyes to like this alternate side. And I started watching old rallies and I started watching old speeches that he did.
Yeah.
And, you know, from beginning to end and watching, you know, people commentate from the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it was something that I kind of ignored. Like it was one of these things like, can we just survive these 4 years? And I hate to be like that. And to the people that are trolling me and support Trump, it's just how I felt. You know, I
Yeah.
didn't understand how we got to a point where that was our best choice. You know, I guess that was kind of how I felt like this is where we are. Um, but regardless, um, I started watching his rallies and his speeches. Like one in particular that kind of sticks out in my mind is when he did a July 4th speech. And of course, it's like this was like I think 2015. Or no, it was no, I'm sorry, it was 2018. So pre-pandemic, but like, and just a slew of MAGA hats and just kind of what you see now at rallies. And I'm not like stereotyping, I'm just saying it was kind of that, you know, group of people. And he's literally just talking to them.
Yeah.
And when I say that, he intentionally villainizes and even exiled the left. And the
Totally.
problem with that narrative is there's not just politicians on the left. There's human beings that exist with moderate and left-leaning views that
Yeah.
have that political leaning, like me, who up until, you know, the last couple of years would have deemed myself at best moderate, you know. Um, so I felt like he wasn't a president to all. He was a president to those that supported and loved him.
Totally.
And that was hard for me because for me, being a good president is acknowledging that not everyone in your country has your same views, but
Yeah.
they still depend and look to you to
Yeah.
make good decisions for them. And they expect you to include them in your conversation. He never did that. And I mean, and I've watched countless videos and he's always vilified anybody that didn't agree with his entire agenda
Yeah.
or didn't sing his praises. And I've had a couple conversations with people that they weren't like, okay, like, oh my God, I'm on your side now. But they definitely were like, I can see what you mean. Like,
Yeah.
and
Totally.
so, and I appreciate that, but it's,
Yeah.
you know, and I've had conversations with conservatives, like I've jumped into lives where they have like the fuck Biden in the background and the
Yeah.
Trump hat and the Trump shirt. And I said, can I explain something to you? And they're like, what? And I said, do you feel like you get trolled and you're getting negative hate and da-da-da? And they're like, yeah. And blah, blah. I said, let me explain. I'm like, now I'm not saying you're racist. However, the people that are standing for like the National Socialist movement, the people that are outwardly being like Nazis, KKK, like these types of individuals that exist in our everyday society that are very openly white nationalists. I mean, let's just put it out there,
Sure.
are
Yeah.
wearing the same clothes, are
Yeah.
wearing the Trump hat, are wearing the MAGA attire. So,
Yeah.
how comfortable do you think a leftist, or even for
Yeah.
that matter, a person of color, a marginalized person of color, or someone part of the LGBTQ is going to feel comfortable going up to you knowing that the same people that associate with your clothing and don't know you
Right.
from Adam are not going to know if you're this person or if
Or
you're
yeah,
this person.
that's
And
absolutely correct.
and
Yeah.
and I had some people that were, you know, understanding of that, like, you know, narrative, and it's like you've got to take a moment to say, hey,
Yeah.
I understand that you don't see yourself as that person. And I hope that deep down you aren't. Unfortunately, a lot of people do have internalized racism, internalized misogyny
Sure.
that they haven't
Yeah.
recognized yet. We I think we all do by default. But but regardless, you're not like outwardly saying, you know, white nationalists, you
Yeah.
know, white people,
Yeah.
like, but how does someone who sees just a Biden flat funk Biden and your outfit, and how do they know that?
Yeah.
How do they come into this conversation and feel safe to start and engage with you?
Sure.
They don't. So, you know, I think that's a big issue is we've commercialized this
Yes.
personality
Yeah. Yeah.
that now, like, I'm guilty of it. I drove behind a truck yesterday that had a "Don't tread on me" with a snake on his thing, and I'm like in my head going, "Fuck that guy!" Like, and I
Yeah.
hate that I feel like that. I feel like the flag has been tainted quite a bit, and I hate that. And I see more and more people feeling like that. People that were, you know, veterans, people that are active military, they're feeling like their flag has now become this commercialized, you know, representation of hate. So I just wish that we could, as a whole, see
Yeah.
that. Um,
Definitely. And like I don't think it's to the same extent, and I don't want to like say it's like tit for tat the same, but I do think like
right.
also as like a leftist culture, we also
Hmm.
have embraced, I think, that mentality too, right? And it's not like to your point, like I think there are some like cultural like white supremacy things that are definitely on the right that don't exist on the left, but
Oh
it
yeah,
is this desire to, I think, vilify anyone on the other side who does not
yeah,
believe in your side of the equation, right?
a
And
hundred
like
percent.
that
Yeah,
challenges me a lot too, because it's like I actually think most people are looking for ideas and like solutions and want to be a part of something, and like it's okay to disagree. And I
right.
think that's something we have to get comfortable with again. But like, you should not like ostracize those who don't share the same views as yourself, right? Like, if we do
Yeah,
that, like we are literally doing the same thing that we are being, I think, impacted by the right as well, right? So like, I
right.
think it's important that we have conversations about the other side. I think it's also equally important that like we as Democrats and progressives also challenge us to do better on our end as well. And like we also have our own battles to fight as a lefty community too, right? Like the
Yeah.
corporate
Oh yeah,
culture,
spectrum. It's
the
a spectrum.
centrism. Oh my God! Like
It is
the
such a
work, the
spectrum.
work is heavy on our side of
It
the aisle
is.
as
I
well,
mean,
right?
to
And
even come to terms, I mean, like right now we have the battle of the vote. Like we have extreme
yeah,
leftists who don't want people to go vote, that are actively kind of protesting against voting because they say it doesn't get anywhere. And I get it. Like I
yeah.
get it.
I
We
get,
feel
yeah, sure,
defeated, but we also have a history of never seeing above the 60% voting. Like
yeah,
we've never had 100% of people just swarm the polls and give us truly an example of what a majority
sure,
rule would look like.
yeah,
You know,
and
so I'm torn with that because I feel like if
yeah,
we had that moment in history where every single person that was eligible to vote showed up and voted,
yeah.
we would see such a change in our
Yeah.
government
And
massively.
I don't disagree with that, right? Like I think no matter where we're at as a country, no matter what the circumstances are, we as a nation have a very unique privilege of being able to vote, right? Well, I know that people's rights are being attacked like literally every single day at this stage, but at the end of
Yeah,
the day, like we have the option to vote, and I think we should always take that. I'll say this though, like I get why people feel like it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, I think we've actually really done a good job of making sure the culture of apathy and, you know, like betraying voting trust over and over again, like that, that's real. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, I
I
think
don't
even,
blame them. I'm not, and
yeah.
again,
And I think,
I
like,
don't
for
blame them
us,
for having that mentality.
totally, and I don't hear you say that either. But I
Yeah.
think like what I always think about is like as candidates, right? Like this is in a way our obligation, right, to try to change that. Because like I'll tell you this, like when I walked into this election, and you know, like every consultant, every political expert, right, always tries to tell you like the game, you know, like this is how it is kind of thing. And what experts would tell you is that in Denver, right? Like the main voting block that reoccurs every single cycle are people who are wealthier, people who are whiter, and they're progressive, but they live very like I think good privileged lives in like a
Yes.
very central part of Denver. That like you know like that's what that typically looks like. But then when you go outside of that core, you know you see a lot of working class neighborhoods, a lot of immigrant neighborhoods, a lot of communities that speak different languages and things like that, who you know, experts are saying like, oh, you can't, don't go there. They don't vote. They don't vote. Oh,
Yeah.
they have, and you know, when I hear that, like, it really drives me nuts,
But we
right?
could get them to
Because
vote. Like if we go and talk
yes,
to them, we can
oh
get them
my
to vote.
god, and
Just
I
go
asked
talk to
people
them.
that I was like, have these people ever had someone go to their door and be like, hey, look, there's an election coming up. Here's my story. Here's why I think your vote matters. Have they tried to speak a different language? Have they done things like that are multilingual? Have you met them where they need to be met? And I think the
Right.
answer is overwhelmingly no. Because when you try to put everything into a formula in a box and like do all the things that all these like pundits and like political consultants want you to do over and over again, you know, it comes at a cost of being like a real person. It comes at a
Yeah.
cost of like putting people above the data, the metrics, the money, the politics, and all that stuff. Like, we have to like return back to like a true grassroots essence, right? Like, go to
Yeah.
the block, go to the neighborhood, go to the meetings, and like build people up from there. And I think we will see the outcome that you and I want to see, which is more people feeling like their vote matters and that it can make a
Yeah.
difference and that they should be voting over and over again. But you know, we have a lot of work to do on that front. Like a lot of people, for good reason, like we said, they don't feel like this country, their representatives, this process has actually helped them or empowered them at any single point. And like, you know, I agree. Like, as much as like we have to not only just talk about why that's problematic from the voter side, but it's like we also have to lean in, I think, as electeds, as parties, as people who are running into office to talk about like, well, what are we doing or what aren't we doing, you know, to make this
Right.
process a bit better? I mean, it's complicated, you know.
It
This
is.
game that you and I decided to walk into is like not a it's not an easy thing to try to
It's not for
correct,
the light
right?
of hearts. It's not for the light of hearts. Well,
Yeah.
I have to go eat so I can
Yeah,
go to
yeah, I
work.
gotta
But this
thank
was
you. I
awesome.
love this. Yeah, I appreciate
Yes.
you. Thank
We
you for
can do
what
it
you do.
again if it gets,
Yeah.
when's your primaries coming
June
up?
28th. Yeah. So, like, a
Okay.
message to anyone who's listening, you know, especially, I don't know if you're in Colorado, but if you are, you know, June 28th is the primary. I hope you register to vote. I hope you give us a shot. Please check us out. It's Neal Walia for Congress, NEALWALIA for Congress.com. To anyone who ends up following or whatever, like, I appreciate it. Like, I have to be honest with you, Jess. Like before I jumped on TikTok, I was definitely like that boomer sounding person who was like, "Oh, TikTok is like so ridiculous. Why would anybody be on this app?" And like what I've learned through like leaning into this application is that this is really a tool for grassroots movements
It
to
is.
like take place on. And like
It is.
you can build community on here. You can reach so many people and so many things. And so, you know, if you all give me a follow, I would definitely appreciate that. Like we're trying to tell the story as much as we can, and you know, any support that y'all can give, you know, it is much appreciated. So
So
thank
I'm gonna upload this on my YouTube.
thank
I
you.
do have a YouTube, and then
Yeah,
I'll share a clip of it on here
I
and tag
love
you.
that.
So yeah, so
Thank
that'll give
you.
you. It'll probably be later this afternoon, but I'll get that done.
Hey, and we'll try to
Yeah.
blast it far and wide. And
Yeah.
you know, thank you for what you do. I appreciate you kind of using your voice for good. And you know, I'm looking forward to talking again soon.
All right.
All right.
Have a good
See
one,
ya.
Neal.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Stay. Yeah.